everybody, it's Luke here at Young Writers, and I'm chatting today with the wonderful Aisling Fowler. How are you doing?
I'm really good, thanks, Luke. Really happy to be here.
Cool. So I always get started with the same question, the very same question. We could have people here that are really looking forward to your book coming out, and we might have people that haven't come across yourself and your work and your book. So could you let us into your world, step into the wonderful world of Aisling Fowler for a moment and tell us about who you are, what you do?
My name is Aisling Fowler, and I am the author of Fireborn, which is my debut middle grade fantasy, which is coming out on September 30th. I live in London at the moment. I'm in London right now, but I've moved around a lot in the last few years. So Fireborn was written a little bit all over the place, but now back in London. So yeah, happy to be here.
And tell us a little bit about your writing journey, because this will possibly go out to young writers or teachers showing it to the class and whatnot. And there might be people out there who want to become a writer. So I always like to find out about how authors ended up where they are. For some people, they I had a chat with one author who lived in a bookshop when they was 2, was writing from when they was 4, and went to uni to study literature, and that was it. And some people who just fell into it in a way, it still takes skill, but had another job and kind of landed there. So I always find it really interesting to ask that.
I wrote a lot when I was a child, and I don't know where that sort of came from. I always loved books, and I think telling stories, like I told stories to my cousins when we had sleepovers. I would always tell a story when we were in bed at night before we went to sleep, stuff like that. And I guess that I started writing them down at some point, and I really loved it. And I even sent a book. It was 3 pages long, I think. Probably quite plagiarized from another book, but we'll just gloss over that. Anyway, they didn't want it, very sadly, but maybe not that unexpectedly. But it was really important to me until I was probably about 13 or 14. And I don't know what happened, but it just sort of got phased out of my life. I think other things kind of came in, and I got other interests, and I sort of, it sounds really strange, but I sort of forgot that how much I liked it. And I forgot for like years, probably a scary number of years. I reckon I didn't write anything for about 15 years. And then I was training as a nurse, and I met another girl who liked writing, and she asked me to read her manuscript of a book she was working on. And it just was quite a light bulb moment for me, because I realized that I did still have ideas in the back of my head. And I mean, I never actually properly sat down to write them down, but I would sometimes sort of jot them down. But somewhere in there was still the kind of wish to write, and probably like the desire to be an author, but I just hadn't really prioritized it at all. But reading her manuscript, I was like, there's no difference. We're doing exactly the same course. We have the same time pressures, the same sort of demands. It's the only difference is that she makes time for it and I don't. And that was a real sort of turning point for me. That was when I started to come back to writing and make time for it and just commit to it a lot more. And I'm so happy that I did.
Definitely. I do
Yeah.
remember reading about you sending off a 3-page novel, age 11, to a publisher, or
Yeah.
that was it. That was the word. A 3-page novel, I believe it was. I read this somewhere, and I don't know. I thought it was really cool because we might have other 11-year-old writers out there. I mean, we interviewed actually a 6-year-old author the other week, or that's out there. That's really cool. And he wrote like a children's book, and it just never. It always passion. You're never too young, you're never too old. It's fantastic. And so I always love asking that question, because sometimes you get really fascinating answers, and that's a lovely little tidbit about yourself that I really enjoy. And then we move on to Fireborn. So I have a special copy here. This isn't the final cover, but it's very inspired by your beautiful background and the illustrations there. So I mean, it's a wonderful, mystical. Well, actually, why don't I let you introduce it rather than me doing it? So tell us a little bit about it.
Oh, thanks, Luke. So Fireborn it's the story of 12, who is a Huntling, and that means that she has given up her name and her past in order to join this entity called the Hunting Lodge, where she learns to fight the monsters that plague her world. But she has a bit of an ulterior motive for being there, one that's connected to something quite dark that happened in her past. And that's something that's very much present in her mind all the time, and it keeps her very separate from her fellow Huntlings. So she's quite an isolated character at the start of the story. But quite early on, the hunting lodge is attacked by these monsters, and for the first time ever, they manage to break inside the lodge's walls. And after the attack has been quelled and the dust has settled, it becomes clear that someone is missing, and a little girl is no longer there, and she's vanished. She's been taken, and 12's really horrified. But she becomes more horrified when she realizes that the hunters, who were supposed to be sort of, they're the adults in charge, aren't kind of reacting as quickly as she thinks that they should, and they haven't sent someone out immediately to try and get this girl back. So quite impulsively, 12 decides to do that herself. So she just takes a bag of supplies and her pet squirrel Widge and heads off into the wilderness on her own. And she's very confident that she will succeed with that strategy. But she's not the only one who's had that idea. And quite quickly, she meets the lodge's stone guardian, who's called Dog, and two other huntlings called 5 and 6. And she's particularly displeased to see 5. Those two are not the best of friends. And I suppose it's quite a mismatched group that starts this quest together. And Fireborn really is the story of this mismatched group and the journey that they make together, the dangers that they face, and also there's a lot of secrets that they're keeping from each other. So it's the story of how their quest unfolds and how their relationships develop. And for 12, there's alongside that quite an emotional storyline as well, as she tries to kind of come to terms with what's happened in her past.
So my next question actually is links straight from that, but the idea, the sort of concept of the book seems really original. I mean, you know, you can draw parallels from possibly like How to Train Your Dragon or like the Skywalker series or like Brissinger, that kind of thing. But it seems like a really original concept, and it's not something that you know, happens in everyday life. It's not something that we all have experienced or stems from something that, you know, you don't walk up the street and get this idea of this concept. And so it seems really thought out, and this wonderful world where you step into, and it's completely different. And sometimes I find that's actually harder to create, because you're creating everything rather than, you know, set in London or set in wherever. You have to create everything. And so where do you get the inspiration, the ideas from to create this entire new creation, really?
Yeah, it was super fun. I think kind of creating a world from scratch is like, it's fantastic. It's just, yeah, you can really kind of go to town with it. But in terms of how I did it, I mean, the first sort of spark of the story, the first inspiration for it was 12 herself. Like, she's the first character that came to me, and she came to me while I was watching my husband play a video game. So that might maybe have been part of it, but the kind of the video game that my husband was playing, there was this really sort of amazing heroine was the main character. She was really compelling, like really intelligent, just really strong and brave. And I think that something about her kind of reminded me of like other characters that I'd really liked when I was younger, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and even like Xena Warrior Princess before that. So I remember actually sitting on the sofa and thinking, like, why aren't I writing characters like this? And almost immediately, like, 12 popped into my head. And she popped into my head not fully formed, but I did know 2 things about her. And one was that she fought monsters with axes, and 2 was that she was really angry. So in terms of building the world, I knew straight away that the world she was in had monsters. But really, it was more in unpicking her anger that the rest of the world kind of pulled into focus. And it's actually not an exaggeration to say that the whole world and the hunting lodge concept and the clans and all of the other characters kind of grew from 12 herself. And I kind of worked backwards from her anger, which sounds like a really strange thing to say, but I was just sort of like wondered, like, why is she so angry? And then came up with the concept of her family having been murdered. Sorry, that's a small spoiler, but it is revealed quite early on in the story. And then I was like, why were her family murdered? And I thought, well, maybe there are clans who don't get on. And then I was like, why don't they get on? And I thought, well, maybe they just have really different lives because they live in different places and their lives are really connected to where they live. So they can't maybe always relate to each other, or they're really like suspicious of each other. So it kind of, And then I had the monsters and the clans who don't get on, and from there kind of the hunting lodge grew, because I thought maybe you need something that's trying to keep the peace between them, and also kind of keep the monsters in check. And so it really all grew from 12. That was a very long-winded answer, I'm sorry, but
No, I mean it's the answer though, and it's genuine.
yeah.
And that's how it happened, and it makes a lot of sense. If it is going out to people out there that want to be writers, I always find it a really important thing to kind of ask that idea, because sometimes you might be a really great writer but just not have the kind of creative edge to start something from scratch. And so understanding that method, I think, is quite cool. And similarly, the story, the book is full of really interesting, intriguing characters. There's, as you say, 12 as the main protagonist, and kind of like the supporting characters, if you were, and they all have their stories and their really original things behind them. And so a similar question, where, how are your characters based? Are they based off maybe people that you know, or just was it similarly stemming from the one person?
Yeah, I mean, no, they're definitely not based on anyone I know. Don't worry, anyone who knows me.
Yeah, I mean, what's the question?
Don't get me in trouble, Luke. No, they sort of did grow from 12 in a way, but not indirectly. But then their characters sort of developed individually. So I wanted the cast or the cast of characters to be quite ill-suited, definitely at the beginning of the story anyway. And to be honest, I think because of 12's got these really kind of thick protective walls around her, and she appears quite prickly to everyone around her. So I think it would have been difficult to write a character that she would have got along with at the beginning, like with her being the way that she is, definitely at the start. So I wanted to have a mismatched group, but for each of them to be quite different within that group as well. So with Dog was actually quite an easy character to create, because he's a dog, and I thought, well, if he's a dog, he may as well have dog-like qualities, and he's specifically a guard dog. I mean, he's sort of a huge magical stone guard dog, but like he's still a guard dog. So I thought, I'm going to make him sort of protective, quite dutiful, very loyal. But that seemed a bit kind of almost a bit too boring. And also he's really old and he's really experienced in battle. So there was a bit of a risk, I thought, with him that he would be too in charge. So I thought maybe I'll take him out of his comfort zone, and maybe he's never been on a quest before. And he'll definitely never have been on a quest with like 3 bickering children who don't want to work as a team. And it's just something completely out of his experience. So so that sort of would make him a bit more interesting. And then with 5 and 6, I wanted them to be best friends and really close, but also completely different characters. And 6, again, on the surface, is this quite sort of straightforward, understanding character. And he's actually the one who sort of first starts building bridges with 12. But again, I didn't want him to be too kind of simple. So I kind of have made him quite good at keeping secrets. So his storyline is quite an interesting one, I think, in the book. And 5, just again, he's a little bit like 12 in that he's got a kind of a bit of a protective barrier around him. He seems quite cocky and overconfident, but he is kind of hiding a little bit of something else underneath. So that's sort of how they all sort of grew and sparked off each other, actually. I think they grew together, but 12 was the first spark of them.
Yeah.
And Widge. I didn't even talk about Widge. Oh my goodness. What? He's a character too. He's just not a speaking character. And actually Widge is really important in the story because because he's the only one at the beginning of the story that 12, that I think that you see through him, you see sort of the softer side of 12, but that's like at the start of the story, the only way that you do see that other side to her. And also he's so like, he's the most joyful character, I think, out of all of them. He doesn't talk, but I think he brings a sort of lightness with him. So I loved writing him.
And then probably an easier one to answer, but was it important for you to have a female protagonist? Because at the moment there is a lot more going towards diversity in books, children's books especially, and it's a really important thing. And oftentimes we don't see a female at the forefront of a book, of a novel or whatever, and and it's really important too. So was it something that you knew straight off that was going to happen, that was something that was really important?
Yeah, I mean, and actually you sort of you've kind of addressed the reason for that a little bit already in your question, but I think she was always going to be a girl because the direct inspiration for her are all female characters, and like you said, I think that there should be more female characters in fantasy with kind of leading roles. And with 12, I think I'm. This sounds really immodest, but I'm like quite proud of her as a character because she's not a people-pleasing female character. She's really the opposite of that, actually. She really doesn't care what anyone thinks of her, and she just isn't afraid of sort of being assertive or confrontation. Sometimes she takes it a bit too far, but she's got some qualities that I think I hope maybe will be inspiring for particularly for young girls kind of reading it, because I do think there's still maybe a little bit of pressure in society to be kind of people pleasers as girls, and to sort of be friendly and be nice and always smile, and I think it's okay to not be like that as well. So that's sort of a little bit of what I was trying to do with 12, although actually maybe that's giving myself too much credit. She just kind of came to me like that, so she was already full of this anger, and I was like, let's go with it. So
I mean, either way it works, and it's, it is an important thing, and it's great that there is this protagonist, that there is this main character with those qualities as well at the forefront of it. And then getting towards the end, what is next for 12, for Fireborn, for this world? Are we seeing Fireborn Mark II, or where are we going?
Well, Fireborn is the first book in a trilogy, so there's 2 more books in the series, and I've actually written both of them, so the story is quite fully formed in my head now. It's really exciting. I mean, I wouldn't say it's sort of they're finished either, then they're both still works in progress, and 3 is quite early stage, but they exist. So I can say that we are definitely going to have a lot more adventures with 12 and her crew. We're going to find out more about 12's powers. We're going to find out, we're going to see more places in the world. I think at the end of book 1, and I'm not giving any spoilers to anyone that are specific spoilers, but it's clear that the story is going to move beyond the hunting lodge, and that is definitely something that's on the cards. So some new characters, some new places, and lots of new monsters, which I'm delighted about because I love writing the monsters. It's like the evil side of me. So there's definitely more to come.
Well, how exciting. We'll be looking forward to it. And then the final question, as you say, you had your writing journey, which was not necessarily, it's quite bespoke, coming away from it. And do you have any advice out there for any writers? I normally say young writers, but it could be for people that have, maybe never put pen to paper. It could be for someone who is 25 and has, and maybe wants to write, but is doing something else. Do you have any top secret tips that they could go out to anyone out there that wants to follow in your footsteps?
Do you know, I don't know if my tips are going to be that sort of groundbreaking. I'm pretty sure everything I'm going to say someone else will have said before, but I think to read a lot is quite it's probably a really obvious one, but I think it is really, really helpful, particularly if there's a particular genre that you want to write in, to kind of focus, well, not to focus your reading on it, but just to know a little bit about like what's going on in that genre, and the things that you like and the things you don't like, and the things that you feel work and the things that you don't think work. And then this is a super obvious one, but to just keep writing. So, because I've already said, like, I stopped for years and years, and I think, writing is a skill like any other. So the more you do it, the better you get at it. So just to keep going with it and not to get kind of sidetracked by, well, I mean, obviously, like it's part of the tapestry of life, isn't it? Like there are going to be other things, you can never just sort of totally focus on that, but just try and carve out a little bit of time for it. If it's something that's important to you, then you need to dedicate a little bit of time to it, even if it's a really small amount. Like over time that builds up. And I guess my last piece of advice is just to try and be brave in seeking other eyes on your work. It can be quite scary to, it's so personal. You have an idea in your head and you're trying to translate that onto a page. And and it feels like a part of you. So you don't almost sometimes feel a bit protective of it, like you don't want people to attack it or criticize it. But I think it's a really important stage of being a writer, to be able to take that step towards being brave, giving your work to people, and being open to hear what they think of it. And the more opinions you get, you'll probably work out that you agree with some people and you don't agree with others, and you always have to make choices that are right for your story. But I do think it improves you as a writer, to find out what the areas of weakness are, I suppose, in your work. And it can be a bit confidence denting, but I think it is really important. So to be brave and to persist and just to have fun as well. It's amazing, like, to be able to, you know, to try and like write a story from your head onto the page and then give that to someone. It's sort of like, you know, you hope it's kind of like a gift. So
yeah, I mean, it's true, you know, that is, I think that's a really cool piece of advice actually, is that some people write and they don't realize, and it is a really scary thing to put it out there, to do something so personal oftentimes, and then just to send it to people and get feedback. And it's also really hard to get feedback and to be told how to improve something that you've put a lot of work into as well. I think it's something that, you know, if you write as a hobby, then you might not necessarily have to do, but if you want to write and release books and something, it's absolutely something that maybe you don't have to think about right now, but something to consider going down the line. And it's true, and I think sometimes we forget that, and it is a good piece of advice. So there we go. So Fireborn is out on September 30th. Again, there will be a different cover, but this looks really cool anyway. Out on September 30th, and it is, now we know it's the first of a trilogy. From Aisling Fowler is the name. And thank you so much for coming along and taking the time to chat with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Luke. It's been a pleasure.
Of course, and good luck with it all.
Thank you.
Cheers.